Major League Baseball is the subject on today's Sportsnaut interview, and we are excited to have with us ESPN senior writer David Schoenfield, who's going to talk to us about all the news across Major League Baseball. And David, this morning I wake up to find out Gerrit Cole's in Los Angeles. They're trying to figure out what's going on with him. Tell me a little bit about the situation there. I talked to a beat writer in New York this morning who said they're more concerned that they're letting on because they just don't know. But what are you hearing with that situation? And if Gerrit Cole misses more than the 1 to 2 months they've already estimated, what are the Yankees going to do?
Yeah, that sounds like the news. We're waiting for that update. Certainly, you don't want to speculate, but the fact that the Yankees are being so quiet about this certainly has to be a little concerning. Again, when he was pitching in spring training, his velocity was fine. It was just that recovery that he was having trouble with. So look, no doubt, we all know the Yankees rotation isn't very deep. They traded all that depth in the Juan Soto trade. Needless to say, it's a huge blow if he can't go.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And during that time, as they were starting to get some inklings that might not all be well with Gerrit Cole, they engaged with the White Sox on Dylan Cease. Apparently, the Yankees thought the price was too high. In come the Padres, surprising everybody after what they did in the offseason. They get Dylan Cease. Now, talk about that deal and the Padres, and you can see my Tony Gwynn bobblehead, so I have a personal interest in this. But the Padres, after the Juan Soto deal and everything went bad for them last year with that stacked lineup, what does this mean for them, the fact that they went out and got a pitcher like Cease who was in high demand?
Yeah, I graded this trade last night. I gave the Padres a B+. They gave up, a fair amount of prospect capital. But certainly they get a potential frontline pitcher. But now here's the key. Dylan Cease has only had that one dominant year in 2022 when he finished second in the Cy Young Award. Last year, his velocity was down about a mile per hour, although he was still throwing 95, still one of the hardest throwing starters. The slider that was so dominant in 2022 wasn't as effective, but he wasn't as bad as his ERA. 4.58 ERA, I think. You look at his overall peripheral numbers, they were better than that. Put him in Petco, and I think you still potentially have a starter with an ERA in the low to mid threes. And more importantly, now that rotation has a chance to be really good. I think Fangraphs has them projected as the 7th best rotation in the majors, with Darvish and Musgrove. I really like Michael King. I think he's going to be a nice, solid pickup, part of that Soto trade, and now Dylan Cease. Your top 4 look pretty good, and that, to me, puts the Padres right in that wild card race.
Yeah, and that NL West, let's talk about that, because you talk about the Padres right there, obviously, and, of course, the Dodgers. I mean, if the Dodgers don't win a World Series, right, after what they did in the offseason, everybody's going to be disappointed and say it was a failure of a year. And then you got the Diamondbacks, David, in that division, who I think whatever they lost, they gained back, plus some. And so that NL West with the Dodgers, Padres, and Diamondbacks, it's going to be kind of a brutal gauntlet, isn't it?
So you're not factoring in the Rockies here at all.
Not yet.
No,
they're building. They got some young talent.
I even throw in the Giants, who I still think are going to sign Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery. They have the payroll room to make that move. They need a starting pitcher. So we'll see what happens there. But, yeah, clearly the Dodgers, are the huge favorites in that division. We'll see how the Mookie Betts at shortstop situation plays out. Yamamoto, he's had a couple rough outings his last spring training, 2 spring training starts. I don't want to read too much into that because I watched his first one when his splitter was just absolutely dominant. It looked unhittable the way that thing just dives down below the knees. I think he'll be fine. But, yeah, the Padres, I kind of like what they're doing. Big questions in the outfield. It looks like Jackson Merrill might be their starting center fielder. You know this. I've talk to people in San Diego. They say he's looked pretty good defensively out there, even though he, has come up as a shortstop. The lineup, obviously without Soto, not as good, but they got some big names. Yeah, I think both Arizona, San Diego, are going to be right in that wild card race.
But you brought up the Giants, and it's interesting though, because I think the Giants every year, for people who maybe thinking more about East Coast baseball, They forget about the Giants, and the Giants always seem to do better than people think. The organization has just done a great job there in San Francisco in keeping that team competitive, even in off years, if you want to call it. Obviously, after their nice championship runs, they seem to be able to do that. What's the magic there? Is it the front office? Is it the administration there?
Well, it's always a little bit of that, the sum of the parts, is better than it looks on paper. Not that they were a great team last year, right? I think they were still under 500, but I thought that might have been a potential 100-loss team.
Yeah.
And they were competitive. New manager, we'll see how that plays out with Bob Melvin coming in. But to me, who's their number 2 starter right now behind Logan Webb, who's great Cy Young contender? That's to me where Blake Snell, he's still out there. That just seems like the perfect fit. Matt Chapman was a good addition. He'll help the defense. Jung-Hoot Lee, the new center fielder. I'll be really curious to see what kind of numbers this guy puts up, because he's not going to hit a lot of home runs, I don't think, but he might be a 300 hitter, high on base. They haven't had a legit center fielder in a decade. Who's their last, good center fielder? So he'll help a lot.
It'll be interesting. And you mentioned a couple times there, Blake Snell, obviously Montgomery, JD Martinez. All three of those guys are still out there. If you were to become a Nostradamus, tell me where you think those three guys end up.
Well, the Yankees, are they in the mix now? Hard to say. I mean, as you know, they're over that highest level of luxury tax. So if they sign Snell for, say, $30 million, they got to pay 110% tax. So that's really $63 million.
63,
and
exactly.
Can they afford it? Yes. Does Hal Steinbrenner want to pay that? No, right? He likes making a nice profit every year. And again, the Gerrit Cole situation is still up in the air. Blake Snell is not going to wait until May to figure out where he wants to play. So if I had to pick, I think Snell and Montgomery, one goes to the Giants, one goes to the Angels. Snell's been linked with the Angels. Yeah. The question there, does he want to win? Angels probably aren't going to win. JD Martinez, I haven't thought too much there. I mean, Giants, I guess, could be a possibility. I don't know. You got any ideas on JD Martinez?
No, I think those are good.
Padres, I know, talking to some radio guys in San Diego, they would love JD Martinez.
Yeah.
No, they don't have a DH. So that's
they don't have a DH. He would fit well there, I think. But then again, it's you look at spots, and then working through spring training, there's always some team that has an injury somewhere. Yeah. Too. And so then do you suddenly become a little nervous, and there's a GM out there that says, hey, I need a bat in that lineup. And so now do I go after JD Martinez? So we'll see. It'll be interesting. When you look at spring training, though, so far, who's jumped out at you? Like who's really impressed you and surprised you when it comes to an individual player that maybe you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to overreact to spring training.
Right.
I think a couple of the young kids, James Wood and the Nationals, he was the main prospect in that Soto trade. He's a huge 6'7" kid, still has room to fill out, enormous raw power. I think he has 3 home runs, but he struck out a lot. He's going to strike out a lot. He's a big, tall guy, but he's drawn some walks. I think we could see him in the majors later in the year. He's not going to start in the big leagues. Might start in Double-A, make it up to Triple-A. But he has, huge 40-homer potential if it all comes together. Certainly Wyatt Langford for the Rangers. I'm sure, going to crack the opening day roster. My colleague Jeff Passan, he wrote a story, and he had a quote from Mike Maddox, the Rangers pitching coach, saying Langford's the best player on the field. And that was after a batting practice session, but it must have been one heck of a batting practice session. But, number 4 overall pick last year, tore it up in his 2 months in the minors. He looks like he's going to be a stud. So those are kind of a couple guys that have stood out for me.
Yeah, and I mean, you look across the league, too, some of the teams that did so well last year, of course, the World Series, we look at the Diamondbacks. We've already talked about them a little bit. There's also out in that AL East, the Baltimore Orioles. They go out and get Burns. They improve that. They really needed to get that pitcher. They get it. They won 100 games last year. Inexperienced roster, so they get in the playoffs. They don't get past the first round. You look at that Orioles team. Do you think they're still there and still that team to beat, especially with the unknowns with the Yankees there in that division?
Yeah, I think so. We all know the young talent, more young talent coming up. Jackson Holiday, you can throw
Oh,
him on
Holiday.
that list of
Yeah.
guys who look pretty good. I'll be curious if he does make the opening day roster.
Mm.
They don't have to rush him, but they have, still have a lot of options in the infield. Kobe Mayo, Hurston Kerstad. I mean, just tons of talent. Pitching without, Kyle Bradish and John Means are both starting the year on the IL. So what's that rotation depth, even with Burns? But yeah, the Orioles, look, they're going to be here for a long time. They're going to be every year the next at least 5, 6 years, right up there. Hey, I mean, they have money to spend. Could they be in on Snell or Montgomery?
Can you imagine? Wow.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at Mike Elias, who came from the Astros, and the way the Astros operated, they didn't sign free agent pitchers. They traded for Verlander, trade for Cole, trade for Zach Greinke. So that seems to be the playbook that Mike Elias is following, and not get committed to these overpaying for pitchers who get hurt. But certainly, maybe Blake Snell on a 3-year deal makes sense and doesn't hurt them, long term.
That's good. Yeah, I know long-suffering Oriole fans really want to get back there and be able to cheer on their team to a World Series. You look across the board, too. When you look at teams that you think might surprise people in play this year when you get into the season, I know we're still in the throes of spring training. One of the teams I'm impressed with, and I think I look at, especially with the division they're in, is the Cincinnati Reds. I think that's a team with young talent. Of course, they had the salary dump a couple years ago. Fans in Cincinnati left in droves. Now they're back because of Eli De La Cruz, all these folks. And of course, the pitching really improved there. And they have room, too, to go out and get a guy if they need to as they move through the season. What about for you? Is there a team out there you think could be a big surprise this year when you look at some of the rosters out in the NL or AL?
Yeah, I'll double down on the Reds. I had an article last week, 2 weeks ago. I forget when it posted, who's this year's Diamondbacks. Of course, we didn't predict last year's Diamondbacks. That was kind of the whole point, right? They came out of nowhere. The Reds aren't coming out of nowhere because they are sort of a popular pick. But my emphasis there is we know baseball is skewing younger and younger. And that's what the Reds have. They have all this youth. And the question is, can it mature and develop sort of overnight? But what they had 4 rookies, in their regular lineup, at the end of the season last year. They had 2 rookies in the rotation. Can Hunter Green make that big leap? They've added some pitching depth. That'll help. They really had some injuries last year. Frankie Montas, he's a question mark, right? He hasn't really had a good full season since 2021. Nick Martinez, they have depth in the bullpen. But they were also outscored last year, so they got a big leap to go. You mentioned De La Cruz. As fun as he was, as much hype as he got, he wasn't really that good last year.
He fell off big time.
Right, low batting average, a lot of strikeouts, but all the tools in the world. They need one of those hitters to sort of make that leap to become a star. Maybe it's Matt McClain, maybe it's Spencer Steer. Most likely it's De La Cruz. They really need him to make a big leap this year.
Yeah, I know he spent a lot of the offseason working with a hitting coach to kind of change his approach differently. So we do that. The last question I have for you, Dave, before we let you go, we appreciate you being so generous with your time today. The Dodgers. How can you live up to that? If you don't win a World Series, it will be a disappointment based on what they did in the offseason. But you look at that lineup, you look at the pitching. We've seen Yamamoto start off incredibly well and then kind of tail off a little bit, as you talked about. What do you look at when you see the Dodgers there and what they're going to have to do to live up to those high expectations?
Yeah, and I think Dave Roberts has sort of alluded to this. And look, he's done a great job all these years because they win 100 games every year, and they know they're going to win that division. 2021, the Giants did beat them in that great race, but he manages to keep his players focused, but again, it's all about October, and it's a cliche, but we know anything can happen in October. So it's all about clearly just that maintenance, making sure when you get to October, you have Yamamoto healthy, you have Tyler Glasnow healthy, maybe Clayton Kershaw's back, but you have Bobby Miller healthy. You have Walker Buehler healthy. Like, if you have all those guys healthy, you got to like their chances, right? But again, October, anything can happen, and the Braves are great. We know the Phillies
Braves.
with Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler, they can beat anybody in a playoff series. Heck, Arizona, again, you throw out Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly, that's 2 frontline starters. Now you have Eduardo Rodriguez in that mix, so you have 3 pretty good starters. So, but yeah, I'm with you. It's World Series or bust for Dodgers. Lee, I'm on a text chain with a couple Dodgers fans, and they're already doom and gloom because they think they're going to lose.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
and they're hard on Dave. You talked about Dave Roberts. They're hard on Dave Roberts because of the October stuff. But you're right. I mean, you look at consistency from a man. I mean, what else do you want? Okay, yes, you want to win the championship. I get it. But at the same time, he's done an amazing job there. One last question for you, David. That is about the health of baseball in general. So a guy of my age, I grew up with baseball. It's my number one love. Coached my sons in baseball. I played all that stuff. When you look at the health of Major League Baseball, you can look at it from one perspective, see the numbers with attendance in a lot of areas doing really, really well. Clearly, you talked about the young players coming in. I think that's good for the game. But then you look at youth baseball, the impact of baseball and what's going on there, and the way Major League Baseball markets itself back to the younger generation. I think they're kind of missing the boat there a little bit. How do you look at the health of Major League Baseball and baseball in general here in the country?
Well, I think it's in a better spot than people give it credit for. I know we always look at the World Series ratings and they're not what they were. And I get that. You're never going to come close to the Super Bowl, so stop that comparison. NFL is king, every other sport's down here. We all know that. But I just, you mentioned the youth. I actually saw a report the other day that said there's more kids playing baseball now than ever. I think they include softball in that as well, boys and girls. And I know Rob Manfred, for all his criticisms as commissioner, the one thing he does always say, and he's right, is you create baseball fans by developing baseball players. So it is important to keep the kids playing the sport, So if that number is accurate, I think that's a good sign for the future. Baseball, I know ticket prices are high, but it's still a lot more affordable than an NBA game or an NHL game. You can still at most stadiums go sit out in the bleachers for not too much money. The sport was better last year, a lot more exciting. And on a local level, that's what I always say, baseball is a local sport.
Yes.
You go city by city, even teams like Cleveland that don't draw well, their local TV ratings are fantastic. Of course, we have all the issues going on there with the local RSNs.
The regionals. Yeah.
But I think if you really break it down, it's in a better place than people give it credit for.
Yeah, no, and that's a good sign. I like to think that the tide has turned on some of that talk, which is why I asked you about it, and because you have such a great view of it, we appreciate hearing you speak to that. So, David Schoenfield, MLB senior writer at ESPN. Hey, listen, we appreciate you spending the time with us today, and we'll talk to you on down the line during the season.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.